Good to see you all. It's been, 2 weeks off, so 3 weeks since I've done a show, so thank you for your patience. I had 1 week where I was away in Seattle, and I was totally jet lagged. I actually did come back on the Sunday, but I was just destroyed. I needed the rest. And then last week I was looking after like a conference all week, so it's been pretty exhausting 2 weeks actually. Work stuff, but yes, we're finally out of that. I know I haven't really been that busy actually on the internet at all either. It's just been completely full on. I'm finally getting back into my regular patterns, and I'm kind of behind on everything in a way. However, I have been watching the Rugby World Cup. I did actually. I missed the New Zealand-South Africa game because I was flying back from America, although I saw the result. I did get to see the Ireland Japan game. I hope you guys, if you want to watch a good World Cup game, that was a good game. It's been an amazing World Cup. That's part of what I want to talk about today. I've got 3 weeks of news to go through, although I know I always say this, there wasn't an awful lot, so I've picked out, but I've had 3 weeks to pick from, so I guess I do have a lot of topics tonight. But it's been kind of a crazy couple of weeks. There's been all sorts of stuff going on. I've just been probably the busiest I've been in my entire life, actually, lately. But I'm back, I'm here, so Knar. I suppose I should pronounce that Nar. Is that correct, or should I actually say the K like a Knar? Nice to have you watching, as well as everyone else. I'm relieved that I have anyone who still wants to watch this show after I was away for 3 weeks away, I suppose. It's been 3 weeks since I last did a show, so yes, very, very much appreciate having all of you wonderful people there. Let me see if I can adjust my menus, which I can't, but I guess that's okay. That's because I was traveling, and now it's like, stop giving me messages. I see on the side we've got Sergeant Booker, whoop whoop. We've got Tokyo 503 saying evening all. Hope you're all enjoying the Rugby World Cup. Some great games so far. Yes, indeed. Welcome back, me. Sergeant Booker. Boom! I actually noticed that lately the recorded show starts like about 30 seconds after the start of the actual stream, so it doesn't include the boom, which is like, I feel like maybe I should actually like do a boom to like mark, if I get round to editing, which you in the in-video editor, I should do like a boom when I'm through with the greetings in the beginning to mark the beginning of when I want to get into the topic. So maybe I'll do that. Degens Konto, good to see you. You're actually home and awake for the stream. It has been ages. It's been ages for me too, so good to have you at home. Glad that you're awake. And if you are awake, no worries, because this will put you to sleep. We have Bull Birdits Boy, no tax, Revolution Now. Yes, again. Well, but you know what? I think people are getting used to it, and frankly, we'll get into this a bit later on, but it feels a little bit like, because of the way that the sales tax works in Japan, that the 8 yen is almost justified, the 8% tax is almost justifying the 1 yen coin existence. I'm happy just for the easier math, frankly, but yes, we'll see. We've got Dan H. Hi indeed, good to see you. We've got, how is everyone? Hope everyone here is well, indeed. We've got Kanar, I hope I've got your pronunciation right there. We've got, I think I said Sergeant Bilko. Quint Rankett, good to see you. There's an ad that shows when you're live, so you have to reload the page. That might be my ad settings. I'm sorry, I don't think I set it for pre-roll. I'll go and have a look at that. Sorry about that. Hey, Brian McNeil, good to see you, sir. And yeah, wow, awesome to have, awesome to have Brian McNeil in the comments. Good to see you. I'm a huge fan of Brian McNeil, of course, as you all know. But even better when he's live in the comments. And hey man, look, I've just done like a scramble through the topics. I've kind of been disconnected for the last couple of weeks, so as always, including and especially Mr. Brian McNeil, if you've got topics for me to talk about, I'm here to talk about anything, but if not, I've of course brought them with me. So let's get into it. During this live stream, shouldn't our hearts go doki doki? Doki doki kira kira, does it give you hot sparkles? What do they call it? Does it sparkle joy? So yes, first thing, of course, is a good dry run for the Olympics next year in Tokyo, where it is common that they are planning to do, of course, the marathon in the day to avoid it being like in the high 30s with high humidity. They're going to do the marathon early in the morning when it should be sort of high 20s, low 30s, and high humidity. And that's an experiment. The Doha World Championships. I mean, wonderful that I believe Doha is that Qatar or UAE? You know what? I should know that. Doha. Is Doha... What country is Doha in? Someone in the comments help me out. Now I feel obsessive over this and like I want to check. I don't want to say the country wrong, and I pride myself on this stuff, but I think Doha is United Arab Emirates. Qatar. Okay, it's in Qatar. Thank you, everybody. So anyway, they're having the World Athletic Championships there as the result of something completely not connected with corruption and bribery whatsoever. And in fact, there are a number of sporting events, I mean, including the Soccer World Cup. So we're getting a preview of that. So they decided it'd be a good idea that they would hold a marathon there as part of the World Athletic Championships. And yes, it seems that when you hold, even at midnight, they held it to try to have the temperatures as low as possible. It was only 30 degrees. It was the overnight low, 30 degrees with 80% humidity, which is pretty much what it's going to be in Tokyo during the Olympics next year. And during the, I believe, the women's marathon, of the 68 runners, only 40 of them managed to complete. And even people who completed often needed to be hospitalized afterwards. So yeah, there you go. Pretty scary, actually. And this is what it's going to be. This is why in 1964 they did the Olympics in Tokyo in October, just because during July they thought that would be silly. But of course, you know, broadcasters going to broadcast, you know, sponsors going to sponsor. They are going to need to. Now it's all dictated by money when it has to be. And so we'll see. You know, it's a good indication of the problems that we're going to have. And I know that they actually had experiments, including of all the experiments to cool down. They had like a warm spray, you know, like cool sprays, not warm sprays. They had kind of outdoor air conditioning. They had all sorts of things, including, I believe, at a rowing event, they even experimented with getting like a snow making machine that they use on ski fields and having artificial snow fall on the crowd. Apparently none of these things actually reduced the temperatures at the venues, although they did contribute a little bit to the comfort of the people watching. No, yes indeed. I mean, you know, to some extent it makes sense, but you know, to some extent it obviously doesn't. And so that is a thing that happened. Yes, Rugby World Cup. So somewhere 420,000 people have attended events so far. And actually, I mean, for one, isn't Japan good at this? And going back, Japan, you know, the Rugby World Cup, like the Olympics, is held every 4 years. And Japan, and this is actually the second attempt that Japan made to host the Rugby World Cup. It actually tried to host in 2000, 5 years from now, so 15, where it was awarded to New Zealand. And I can remember the Japanese rugby board, which, well, like all countries with sports associations, they all have their own sort of problems, and particularly the Japan one is headed by former Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori, who is the worst Prime Minister in the whole 20 years I've been in Japan. And I don't like him very much at all, and I hold him responsible for a lot of the administrative problems, both with rugby and the Olympics, which he oversees. However, you know, when Japan lost their bid for the Rugby World Cup in 2015, he made the complaint that, you know, the top rugby nations have just decided to keep a club to themselves, and they don't want to expand rugby. And at that time, there are a lot of big question marks of the readiness of not so much Japan as a country, but certainly the Japanese Rugby Board to be able to host it, you know, the Japan Rugby Football Union to be able to host an event like the World Cup and to do it properly, just given that, you know, when Japan hosted international matches, they would routinely run out of beer, like even before kickoff. They weren't used to hosting international audiences. There was no sort of entertainment. The facilities were sort of not that great. The you know, generally clueless, you know, the Japanese authorities. And it seems that they have done some study, and there's been a lot of preparation go into this, but particularly really interesting just for me to compare the Rugby World Cup and hosting this compared to the preparations for the Olympics. And the Olympics as well, I guess what it's showing us in a way, it's kind of helping us to compare a little bit or get an idea of what the Olympics will be like, the first thing that I think has become clear, and was already clear from the 2002 Soccer World Cup, as Dan H is raising, is that Japan is really good at these sort of international. Japan loves a matsuri, they love a festival, and they don't really care who's in it or what's it about. Hey, John Anderson, good to see you. So it's sort of like, and without getting too rah-rah Japan, I mean, there's a big thing. Both Japan and Korea made really compelling bids for the 2002 Soccer World Cup. I say soccer, I'm from New Zealand. But there was a problem. In Japan, all of the games, whether it was like, Ghana versus Tunisia or whatever, every game between, they were largely sold out. It was hard to get tickets. So people in Japan wanting to get tickets that couldn't get hold of tickets would fly over to Korea to watch games, because the games in Korea, which didn't involve Korea, were played in front of nearly empty stadiums. And it kind of goes to show a little bit of the difference between the sort of nationalism and the sort of mindset of the two. That's something I really like about Japan. Whole towns adopted whole teams during the Soccer World Cup. It still is a big deal about how the Cameroonian team was hosted by a town in the middle of Kyushu that had no foreigners, and how they sort of adopted the players and everything and started up all these sort of exchange relationships and so on. And it's something that, it's kind of Japan at its best when it's doing, it's true, when Japan is doing hospitality, Japan just does hospitality really well. This is why its tourism market is booming so well, and why people who are, one thing I've had in the last 2 weeks is I've met people from pretty much all around the world, and I always hear now from other people, the word has gotten out. When I came to Japan 20 years ago, it was like coming to Mars. People really didn't know the country very well, and it was kind of like, why are you going there? But now the word is well and truly out, and everyone's telling me, like, Japan, either they've had an amazing trip to Japan, often now already having been to more places in Japan than me, because I leave on my vacations, or they're planning to go, and they've heard all these amazing things. And this is kind of like, I think Japan has kind of earned its reputation that way. And with the Rugby World Cup, what I like about it as opposed to Tokyo, or the Olympics in general, is that the Olympics are a city bids for it. And, although there are going to be some events in the Olympics that are going to be hosted outside of Tokyo, generally speaking, it's a city-specific event. And I really feel like, as much as I love Tokyo, and, I'm a 20-year Tokyo native, I've lived in Tokyo longer than anywhere in my life, it still is, to me, great to see all of these packed out stadiums all over Japan, 420,000 people attending, and if you want to come and watch games or follow a team, you travel all over the country, you get to see, and Tokyo is wonderful, but it's very different to the rest of Japan. It's like New York and the rest of America. It is Japan, but it's a totally different Japan to what you see elsewhere. So I love the fact that tourists are coming here not only enjoying hospitality and these packed out stadiums and these amazing atmospheres that you're seeing for every game, even like, today watching Uruguay versus Georgia, for example, it was still a big stadium, pretty much full, lots of people in great atmosphere. But they're getting to see the country as well. So, I think that's wonderful. And coming specifically into Japan and how they beat, hey Perk, good to see you. And Sean Bro, good to see you, sir. By the way, just a reminder to everyone as well, if you do the @mark Hiko, it will draw my attention. It will be highlighted in orange, and I will, if you've got a comment or a question for me, I'll jump in and do it. But let's talk about the upset where Japan, I believe currently ranked 11th in the world or 12th in the world, beat Ireland, which 2 weeks ago, until New Zealand beat South Africa, was the number 1 ranked team in the world, ahead of New Zealand. They're currently ranked number 2. People talk about the defeat at Brighton, where Japan beat South Africa 4 years ago, as being the biggest upset in the history of the sport. And this is even bigger than that. At that time, South Africa was ranked 3rd or 4th in the world, and now Ireland. And remember, Ireland beat New Zealand. They beat the number 1 team, my team. They beat New Zealand like twice last year. I never even considered it possible, and I was thinking, why is Japan putting in all their good players to this game when they should be saving them up for Scotland and aiming for 2nd place. So yeah, Sean Bro, yes indeed, I am going to see a game next weekend. I'm going to go to watch New Zealand play in Namibia. I asked the lad if he wants to go see a clash of 2 strong teams in a close match, like for example Wales Australia tonight, or does he want to see a lot of tries and have a lot of fun? And he said, I definitely want to see all the tries. So we're going to Namibia, New Zealand. No disrespect to Namibia, by the way. They play in the Currie Cup. They play in a serious competition, which is a South African domestic rugby competition, although they are an amateur rugby team. They played South Africa yesterday and they lost by like 9 tries. So I think, it should be, the All Blacks should win. I mean, and they should treat it as a good practice for their harder games that are coming up. But we'll see. I mean, again, this is what the World Cup is all about. We saw it today. You take the piss. I mean, the ranking of Namibia is not that far below Japan, and Japan knocked over the number 2 country in the world. So they better not take it too lightly. And Namibia, I remember the thing I remember about Namibia, the fact that although they have some great players. They had I remember their captain in the last World Cup, who had played like 4 World Cups. He was like 40 years old, and apparently his little bio included a thing that he had apparently once survived a lion attack, or he had rescued someone from a lion attack by like hand wrestling the lion or fighting with the lion with his bare hands. So I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, so we've got that coming up next week. But just coming back to the Japan game and what happened, Goromaru, who was the fullback and kicker in the 2015 game, he kind of put it. He was doing TV commentary on NHK, and I loved the way that he put it. Eddie Jones, who was the coach at the time, and he's half Japanese, half Australian, and he's now coaching the England team. He played up. Wow, it's a miracle. I can't believe it either. But it's kind of funny. Eddie, how can I put this nicely? He lies. I love Eddie. He as a personality. I know he drives people crazy. Apparently, he's horrible to have as a coach because he's so demanding. But he does like to stir the pot. That's maybe the better way to put it. And I know he's gotten a lot of mileage from the belief that he pulled off this huge miracle, which it was in many ways, Japan beating South Africa. But he said it with his eyebrows raised, and you could kind of tell. You don't. Rugby isn't a game that you win by flukes. It's 80 minutes. It's like 80 minute. It's an 80-minute long arm wrestle. In the end of the day, it's training, conditioning, and preparation. That's what you need to win, and it's teamwork. You can't just get away with having a couple of showboat, high-profile individual players and get away with it. You've got to have 15 players. In fact, you've got to have 23 players because you've got to have a strong bench as well. I've got to play full on for 80 minutes. In the case of South Africa, 90 minutes, because that last phase of play took 10 minutes, where they won the game. But they prepared for and won that game. And when they asked Goromaru what he thought about Japan beating Ireland this time, and is this another miracle? And he sort of said, I know everyone calls it a miracle. I kind of wish they'd stop saying that. Because truth is, we prepared for that game and we aimed to win, and we executed the plan and we won, and the Japan team has been planning and winning this. So it's time that people stopped declaring it a miracle and realized that start taking the Japan team seriously, that they're actually able to compete. And I thought that was cool. Actually, to me, that's exactly what needed to be said. And this is the fact. Rugby is a closed. I hate Yoshihiro Mori. I really dislike him. But he was kind of making a valid point. New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and France do not take the rest of the rugby world seriously. The Six Nations allowed in Italy into the Six Nations, but they won't allow in Georgia, which has shown itself consistently stronger than Italy. New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa led in Argentina, and Argentina's actually stood up and shown that it can consistently now. It's beaten Australia a couple of times, it's beaten South Africa, it's beaten France. So they've let them into the club, but they won't let the Pacific Island nations in. Fiji has been beating Australia for 40 years, or at least they've been a powerhouse of the Pacific. Back in the 1980s and 70s. And they're like the Harlem Globetrotters. They play some of the most beautiful rugby that you'll see. You've got Japan coming up. But the door is essentially closed on allowing these countries, these developing countries, to play these big countries, because there's so much money wrapped up in the broadcasting and the competitions that they're in. There's no time in the schedule that's considered, a waste to have these players playing games against these countries that would help them get better. And what I love is these supposed, tier 2 countries like, Georgia, Japan, hopefully the Samoa, Fiji, Uruguay has pulled off some amazing matches. They're knocking on the door. They're actually showing that, it's not a miracle when they win games. They deserve equal treatment, and that's what this shows. And I love that Goromaru, you could sit back and be like Eddie Jones and say, yeah, well, isn't it amazing? Isn't rugby a great sport? Take the marketing, take the praise. And he actually said, no, it's time people took us seriously, we actually played this way. And this comes to one other point I want to say about the rugby. So, I often explain to people there's no joy in being a New Zealand rugby fan. The New Zealand rugby team is in many ways it's like watching Hakuho, or back in the day Asashoryu, when they were Yokozuna of the sumo. And there was this problem that there was essentially, and this sounds arrogant as hell, and by the way, New Zealand loses World Cups where other countries peak and they aim and they study us, and we lose once every 4 years, and it'll be during the World Cup. So I'm not saying this like the World Cup is a foregone conclusion. I'm just explaining to you what it's like to be a New Zealand rugby fan. When you watch Hakuho do sumo wrestling, you expect him to win every single time because his skill level, even though it's just so far above the rest of the wrestlers. And he does lose every now and then, and New Zealand loses every now and then. But essentially, Hakuho is a bit like the All Blacks. They operate at a different level. When the All Blacks train and they go and play South Africa or Australia, if things were closer, you would really focus on the team that you're playing against, and you would study them and you'd develop a strategy for them. In a way, the All Blacks pretty consistently, the New Zealand rugby team plays at a level that's kind of so far above the rest of the other teams that they sort of play against themselves. And Hakuho does this as well, and he complains about this. That when Hakuho resigned, Asashoryu resigned, he complained, I don't have a rival who really tests me anymore. And it's like this, the All Blacks, what they've achieved is not just their dynasty of being the number one rugby team for so long. It's not based on focusing on beating every opposition team. It's based on, maintaining a huge gap between them and the other teams, and challenging themselves to play perfect rugby. And I take great pride as a fan, someone who's from that country, who has a rugby team that's just got such high standards of excellence when they play, and that aspires to play such beautiful rugby. But it means that there's no joy. It means that even when we win a game, even against like the number 2 team, even if we beat Ireland or whatever, all the commentary in the newspapers is not, aren't we glad we beat Ireland? It's, how many drop balls were there? Was there a missed tackle? Could we have played a smarter strategy? Did we really have the best players? Was our bench strategy correct? We just nitpick ourselves even when we win. So either there's relief that, oh, thank heavens we won, or when we lose, there's just crushing depression. And so, basically it's a great thing, but it's a little bit, I enjoy supporting Japan, and I enjoy supporting countries like Samoa, because they're a joy. It's a joy to support a team that's struggling, right? That's trying to come up. It's really not fun to support a team that's at the top with everyone trying to knock it off. It is perhaps a symptom of being part of, from New Zealand and reading New Zealand rugby writing. I remember, I think it was the '95 World Cup when Japan was in the same pool as New Zealand, and actually before that as well. New Zealand played a couple of test matches against Japan, and in all of those games, New Zealand scored more than 100 points. And that was a pretty bad one, Perk. That was a great game, and we lost. Yeah, so that was pretty. Believe me, I played rugby for a French rugby club, so yeah, I revisited that game a lot. When Japan lost, and I think it was they lost like 120 points to 20. I mean, New Zealand didn't even really care at the end. It was a practice run. I remember there were journalists in New Zealand who were so harsh on Japan, and I remember reading about the flight back. There was some match where the Japan team had been massacred by like 120 points in a game, and they were flying back, and there was a New Zealander who was like a staff on the Japanese rugby team and was flying back, and apparently he was saying, the coach on the whole way back there was no crisis meeting. There was no review. Everybody was just happy that they'd gotten to play in New Zealand, that they'd gotten to see the haka. And the whole way back on the airplane, the coach was playing on his Game Boy. And I remember this person just wrote a column in a New Zealand Rugby, section of the newspaper, and just said, these guys, any country that takes any sport that they play seriously, this should have been a crisis meeting. And everybody didn't take it seriously in Japan because of two things. Japanese people always like to say, well, of course we're going to lose. Our bodies are so small, we're so tiny and weak compared to, all you big foreign people. It was like they were going into these games with the mindset that they're just supposed to lose. You watch that game against Ireland, and frankly you watch the game against South Africa, and for me, I played rugby in Japan. Japan has 200,000 rugby players. Japan has players just as big, just as skillful, and fact is, line-outs, there are aspects of rugby, it's not all about pure size. If you can train properly and play as a team, and Japan has a lot of terrible habits with coaching and the way that they prepare sports teams. They overtrain, their players show up to games tired because Japanese culture is to not take rests and recovery. During training, they drive their players into the ground. When they train them, they don't develop them right. They hold them back from international competition because they want to keep them in the university competition. They don't want to let them play representative rugby, so they miss out 4 or 5 years before they start playing representative rugby, that they're already behind other countries. And these are things which are getting fixed slowly in Japan. But rather than look at all the things that Japan could have been doing to compete against New Zealand, they were just accepting 100-point losses as like normal. So for me, what's wonderful about this, and hearing Goromaru saying it's not a miracle, I wish people would stop saying that, is damn straight. As someone who is a New Zealander who loves rugby and who loves Japan and who's played rugby in Japan, New Zealand being dismissive of Japanese rugby is not because Japanese are small, it's because of the shitty attitude that they used to show when they got massacred by 100 points by us. It's taken a long time to earn that respect back, but I think Japanese rugby they're finally getting it. It's partly because there are a lot of New Zealand coaches and players over here, what you're seeing is and to me, it represents what Japan did, during the Meiji period as well. I mean, when they modernized and militarized, they showed that, frankly, they showed white supremacists, and there's all sorts of different forms of white supremacy there. Of course, everyone thinks white supremacy means KKK and white hoods and stuff like that. It doesn't just mean that. I think it equates even to buying into the narrative of history that civilization started in Egypt and went to Greece and then Rome and then spread through Europe and then went to America and then we civilized the rest of the world. This is what I think a majority of people, benignly think in countries like New Zealand and America and England. And it's a self-serving but false narrative. And Japan is one of the countries, one of the many countries, that's proof of the falseness of that narrative. Countries like Japan have been doing it different, have been outside of that framework and kicking ass for a long time and demonstrating that there's no such thing as supremacy, based on genetic predisposition. And I love that Japan is a case, and has long been a case of resisting colonialism and resisting the narrative that it's always going to be faces like mine that are at the top of the sport or politics or war or whatever. And they're coming out, they're kicking ass. They beat Ireland, they beat the number 2 rugby country in the world. I mean, how cool is that? So yes, to me, I like that narrative. I love that result. I hope that Japan continues to make it through to the playoff tournament. I hope that the All Blacks, of course, do well. I hope that Samoa does well. Oh, by the way, I met the Samoan rugby team. My old law firm was sponsoring them, and I got a bunch of signatures. I'll go show it to you because it's pretty cool. Be right back. Yeah, check it out. So this is I went and bought a Samoan rugby jersey when I got the chance to go meet the team, and got some of my favorite players PC Nana Williams, who plays for Waikato. Got the coach, signatures on the back. Plus, it's a pretty sweet uniform. I like the design. So got this. So yeah, I'm going to be supporting Samoa. So I guess apologies to Ireland and Scotland. There's not really enough room because I need Japan and Ireland to go through from Pool A. But there you go. Mogberry play. South Africa must win. Well, they've already lost a game. They can still go through in the second. And you know what? They're going to have to play the top team in Pool A, which will either be. I mean, right now Japan is gunning for that. You might have to play Japan again. If Japan loses to Scotland, which on form shouldn't happen, but you never know, of course. You could be playing Ireland, Scotland, or Japan. But I guess you wouldn't want to be playing Japan, would you? Uruguay has done amazingly well. I watched them play Georgia, which they lost today, but they only have 4,000 registered players in the whole country, and they play great rugby, and it looks like they've taken some lessons from Argentina as well, so awesome there. And the World Cup has been amazing. I mean, I love the sport, and you watch it and you can sort of, I hope people get a sense of what I love about it. As someone who refereed the sport in Japan at university level, I think the way the sport's refereed is a great example for other places. The goal of the referee, well, there's different philosophies to it, but mine is that you're a manager of the game. The goal is to help the players to enjoy the game by allowing the game to flow and run, which means that you can give instructions during the game. You can warn players, stop doing that, or else I'll stop it and you don't want me to stop it. And the respect that the players have for each other and for the referee in comparison to other sports. I mean, soccer is a beautiful game, and I think really peak soccer is, I think, the best sport in the world, frankly, and I'll admit that. But there's a lot of really ugly soccer, and I think the worst aspects of soccer, and by the way, there are bad aspects of rugby as well, of course. There's violence, there's there's all kinds of dirty play in rugby and so on, but it's the kind of sneaky dirty play and the kind of disrespect that players show to the referee in soccer. I think it's terrible for kids to watch that, and I think you contrast that with rugby, where you see the respect shown between the teams and to the referee. I think it's a great sport for kids, apart from the fact that it's physically dangerous. Every game I used to play, there would be like one person would get carted off with something that would be life affecting. I've been concussed a couple of times, so I guess I've had that, and I've had that. The effects of that can last a long time. I've never had a broken collarbone, but I've had teammates get. I never tackled that hard, but my teammates did. Broken ribs. I've had bruised and shifted ribs. I've had a broken leg, a broken foot that took a long time to fix. Torn Achilles, that takes months to get better. Knees, they never get better. Back, my back's not been great lately, and that's from playing rugby. But it's a lot of fun. That's the point. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great sport, So anyway, I've talked about rugby for a long time. I could talk about it forever, pretty much. But wonderful Japan. I encourage anyone to watch it. Just check out the atmosphere of the stadiums and the games, and just there's a lot of really, really great games. I'm of course looking forward to seeing South Africa do really well, as I'm sure they're going to do. I'm looking forward to seeing New Zealand keep doing really well. Japan, Samoa, Fiji. Fiji's not been playing great this tournament, but they play some of the best rugby, so you should check them out. Argentina's been playing beautiful rugby. France plays great rugby. They're hit and miss, but when they're playing well, they play great rugby. So yeah, Tai Nakamura, good to see you, by the way. And let's continue on. This is a big deal, actually. I just talked a lot about rugby, but Sergeant Bilko, you played rugby. You once got your nose kicked during a rugby game in school, bleeding like. I've only had my nose bleed like pouring with blood once in my life. It was at training at rugby. I was holding pads, and the guy who was charging into the pads, and the top of his head hit my nose. It didn't even hurt very much. I thought my nose was running, which it kind of was, except it was running with blood. It's weird getting a blood nose, right? I've got I don't bleed very easily like that, but yeah, I'm sorry, that kind of sucks, doesn't it? But people bump into each other. But it's kind of cool that you can play a sport where that happens, and yet you can still shake hands and have a drink afterwards. Anyway, coming back, this is a big deal. The there's a lot of I've probably touched on this before about the issues with Japan and child custody, and there's two layers of problems. The world's very focused on the general issue that, you know, if you are in an international marriage with a Japanese person outside of Japan and you have a divorce and there's a joint custody order, it's possible for the Japanese parent to get around that joint custody order by snatching the kid and taking them back to Japan, where until recently Japan wasn't a member of the Hague Convention, which was a convention where countries would enforce and respect the child custody orders between parents from other countries. So basically, it's possible that if one of the parents is from a country not in the Hague Convention, and you don't want to share custody of your kids in a divorce, you can take your kids back to that country, and the custody order won't be enforced. And Japan wasn't in this framework for a long time, and it was as a result there were a lot of cases of international marriages failing, and Japanese parents, more often than not the mothers, taking their kids back to Japan and denying, and fathers not having access. And there's all sorts of Facebook groups and internet groups around this issue. Pressure brought about the result that the Japanese government did sign up to the Hague Convention. However, there's another problem, there's another layer of problem to this, which is that although Japan signed up to the Hague Convention, Japan itself does not have a system of family law that recognizes joint custody or visitation rights for kids, nor is there any enforcement mechanism in Japan, even if there were such rules. So you've got kind of a fundamental problem that before you even get into the issue of international child custody, which has been where Japan has been under pressure, you've got a fundamental problem before that for Japanese people themselves. Child custody is not shared or joint. In fact, it's fairly accepted, or it's become the norm in Japanese culture, that when you get divorced, that divorce is not only from the family, it's basically a divorce of families. Remembering that Japanese marriage, more often than not in Japan, is about entire families, right? You live with the grandparents as well as the children and so on, and divorce is considered to be a separation of the families, and that includes the kids. And there has been quiet lobbying within Japan by Japanese parents, and increased particularly fathers again, which in most cases do not end up getting custody or visitation. Realizing the difference between other developed nations in Japan, where on the one hand there's the traditionally accepted norm that when you're divorced you can't see the kids, or at least unless there's an informal arrangement where that's made possible. It should also be noted, by the way, that child support, the financial cost of divorce in Japan and the procedure for divorce is relatively simple. The amounts that you have to pay when you get divorced are relatively low. It only takes a form at the city council office to get divorced, although it does have to be mutually signed for it to be done the easy way. You can be divorced without the consent of the other spouse by a court order, but it's quite a lot of trouble. However, the point is that a lot of people, international marriages are often more prone to failing than other types of marriages. And often it's in international marriages, people don't realize that they've signed up for a marriage where they won't have visitation or access to the kids after the divorce, and this is what happens a lot. So it's not just from international couples, of course, but it looks like finally the Ministry of Justice is going to look into whether Japan should have a system like other OECD countries mostly seem to have of access to children and joint custody. The system in Japan is really based on a time when there wasn't divorce, or when divorce wasn't possible because, frankly, there were, frankly, it was impossible for women to live without being supported by men, and it was set up that way. It was set up so it was basically just divorce was just practically impossible. Of course, that's less and less the case now. Women are working and more independent. And divorce is becoming more prevalent, and the problems associated with it, and awareness of international norms about child custody, are steering this. The hope is that the discussion won't be steered by social conservatives and elderly people. But it's a conversation that you can't fix the international custody issues without fixing the domestic custody issues, frankly. So it's good that this is happening. I suppose some people would say, well, that's going to make it easier to divorce, but I would think that probably divorces are going to happen anyway, right? And the key is whether there should be a recognition of parental and frankly child rights. These are rights of children to have contact with their parents. And there's a debate, but there's been a traditionally different conclusion in Japan that it's less harmful to the child if they are denied access to a parent. And they're taking the opportunity to see if that's correct or not. And I think it's a good step actually, and it's important and long overdue. So that's a good thing. I mentioned 420,000 people attending the World Cup, and this is why I think the World Cup and the Soccer World Cup as well are superior events to the Olympics, because you actually have more of the country involved. There's more opportunity to see the whole country, for the whole country to be involved, and it's going wonderfully. So kudos to Japan. The Canada rugby team jumped off a bus wearing yukata, where apparently many of the people on the team had put them on the wrong way, with the right over the left. I didn't know this rule, actually. Apparently this is how you wrap up dead people at funeral ceremonies. I mean, normally they cremate people, so I don't know how I guess that's how they put the yukata on before they cremate them. I don't know, but normally Japanese funeral ceremonies is just a pile of ashes and whatnot. But yes, apparently this is a funeral formation. I've worn yukata how many times, and hell, I'm pretty sure I've done it wrong myself. So although apparently it is commonly known by Japanese and some people find it kind of funny, I would have made this mistake myself, and I've lived here 21 years, so there you go. Really interesting rugby that there was a lot of discussion about on Twitter the other day by Brooke Larson. And first up, credit to Brooke. And now that I think about it, I read this thinking that Brooke was a dude, and I suppose Brooke could be a dude, but the name I associate with being a woman, so I guess I should say she. I hate this about English. I hate that you have to have gender pronouns. In Japanese, you don't need them, and I prefer gender neutrality. I mean, what does it matter if it's a guy or a girl? But yes, I'm going to say she. So look, she put a lot of effort into this 90-minute read, and it is long, and it is, I think, good, and it's good to read. My main overall critique before getting into the substance of this is that there's a little bit of a well, for a start, that sort of the dark side of Japan that no one tells you about, that I'm going to tell you about, that actually people talk about, and that actually is a little bit exaggerated and misleading, is a very common trope for Japan-related subjects, and this is a little bit guilty of that. But the point is, what this is talking about is Japan's treatment of alcohol addiction, alcoholism. And I think it's fair to say that, yes, in Japan, you don't see any public discussion of alcoholism as like a social issue, or frankly any kind of addiction as a social or health issue. There's no information. I've never seen information on like any equivalent of Alcoholics Anonymous or support centers or rehabilitation or treatment. And plenty of people have very immature attitudes towards drinking. This is true. However, also I think important to set this up, and what this very long and detailed blog, which focuses mainly on alcohol abuse, doesn't touch on, and what's important to point out first, is the overall drinking culture of Japan, I think, is far superior and far less toxic than the drinking culture that I know from my own country, New Zealand and Australia, and that I know UK and America, and frankly most other first world countries have. And I think that Japan's, as I see it, superior drinking culture is to do with lack of Christianity and lack of prohibition. So many people in UK and New Zealand and Australia, they treat alcohol like a legal drug, which it is. I mean, that's what it is, but it's treated like, it's almost like, there are so many people who treat it like the purpose of drinking is to get as much alcohol into your bloodstream with as little cost and as short a period of time as possible. And the whole culture that drinking is sinful, that it's sinful, it's something that there's moral guilt about consuming alcohol, and that you're doing a shameful and bad thing. This is why pubs are dark. It's why they're noisy. It's also because they used to get raided all the time by police, so they used to be intentionally dark. It's impossible to have conversations with people. They'd make it so that you could escape out a side door if police would come and raid. It's also a culture of binge drinking, forged by the idea that bars used to have to close at like 5 p.m. So the idea that you had to drink as fast as possible in order to get a buzz from the alcohol, because times were enforced to sort of stop people being able to get drunk. So you've got this kind of culture of trying to regulate the effect of drunkenness, and really treating it like a legal or illegal drug in Western countries that Japan's never had. It's never had that sort of regulation of alcohol, and the result is you have a culture where alcohol is extremely normalized, where people will have a beer with a meal at an izakaya while sitting down in a brightly lit room and talking about their day. And the purpose is not to ingest those little cups of beer. The purpose is to talk and interact while having beers. And that culture, that idea that it's not a competition to see who can drink the most. I mean, sure, you've got students, and sure, there are idiots, and sure, there are some companies where this happens, although this has also gone down a lot. But overall, I find the culture of drinking in Japan to be far, far better than the culture of drinking that I see and that I've experienced outside of Japan, in the countries that I know better. And in fact, the drinking culture of Japan, as someone who drinks pretty moderately, in fact, I very rarely drink actually, but that's what I like about the culture. You don't have to drink all the time, and when I do, it's in a relaxed and sociable fashion. The fact that you can have a hanami with 200,000 drunk people in a park and nothing happens, no fights, no police incidents, no sort of, in New Zealand you need the army, you need to drop in paratroopers to control 200. You would have riots beyond, and it's because if you allowed 200,000 people to become drunk in a park in New Zealand, that would be a big problem. So you have this culture that on the one hand, I think the overall the other big thing about the other important context is alcohol consumption in Japan is declining, to a point that even the government considers a decline in beer consumption to be like a crisis for the beer companies. And people are treating it like an issue that has to be fixed, like we have to figure out ways to get young people to drink more, because it's mainly older people that are still drinking in Japan. So, all of this is important context, but it's a very separate issue to the Brooke asserts, and she doesn't show great data for it, but I assume it's true, that alcoholism is increasing in Japan, and that the problems associated with bad drinking culture, which no doubt exists in Japan, are increasing. And I'll take her at her word, because frankly, the concept of alcoholism, the concept of addiction in general in Japan, is that it's more to do with mental weakness than medical, than it being a medical or health issue. That aspect, and the other points that she makes, that if you're a foreigner who already has alcohol abuse issues and you come to Japan, or if you are or if you come to Japan and develop alcohol abuse issues, Japan is the worst place in the world to be. Alcohol is available at any restaurant. It's available in vending machines. It's extremely accessible. It's accessible from kiosks on commuter train stations. It's available everywhere. And it's because it's so normalized. That normalization is why I think the overall culture is good. But if you have a problem with addiction to this, there is no support, and and it's dangerously available everywhere. I do not want the response to be the same response that other countries have of prohibition as a response to the problem of addiction, but certainly I think there could be a lot more. Japan can and should do a lot more to support people who are suffering issues associated with it. Knar, strong zero. Amen to that. I've had a strong zero once, like the regular 6%. I quite like. It's quite tasty. I tried like the strong zero, and it was like 10%. And I had like half a can of that, and I realized I was like slurring my speech, which I don't get. Like drinking, I'll drink all night and not like slur my speech or have trouble like moving and stuff like that. And strong zero did that. Like that's pretty bad. But yes. So Perk, do they not have AA type communities? Apparently the rehabilitation centers are only available on weekdays. You can't go to any on a weekend. And AA may exist, but you'd have to look really hard for it. It's not well known. I don't know about it. And definitely 2 strong zeros would mess you up. I've had 1 strong zero and it's messed me up. You can see when Victor he'll drink a strong zero live. You can see the effects, and he's a guy who's got a physical ability to drink. There's something actually really wrong with that. So look, in terms of if you are someone who has issues controlling your own alcohol consumption, it's true. Japan is really, really terrible if you have alcohol abuse issues, and the country needs to look at how it supports people around that. The idea that mandatory drinking is still a thing in Japan, like at work, maybe it does, but generally it's gone down a lot, and this is mainly because forced drinking became quickly associated with power harassment around 2005, 2010, and so now all the company drink ups I've been to, like since then, have they've put out as much oolong tea as beer. Certainly the kind of pressure to drink as much as possible or compare how much you can drink. Still maybe at universities and maybe some companies that exist, but it doesn't exist in any company I've worked. It did exist in my first company in the 1990s when I worked in Japan, and I saw it disappear pretty much in the early 2000s. The idea that kids drink, by the way, that's asserted by this article, Brooke says that, and I don't know, anyone I've talked to actually, child drinking is associated with child crime. It's treated as criminal behavior on the part of the kid, not on behalf of the person selling the alcohol. And it's not a crime in terms of being drug consumption, it's just a crime in terms of just something that the law says you're not allowed to do. Case in point, pardon me, there are a few examples of like famous people who are underage getting into trouble for being seen drinking beer, but I think the one I recall is Yuki Goto, who's kind of a up-and-coming idol from E-Jump, big sort of 2-person idol group in Japan, and he was seen drinking alcohol, and he was treated, he was basically barred. His group was broken up, his CDs were sort of recalled, and he was sort of treated like a pariah on a similar level to Pierre Taki from Denki Grove, who was caught with cocaine. And the only crime was being at a hostess bar, being seen at a hostess bar drinking an alcoholic drink. One. So, just for an idea of the social stigma, kids, I mean, geez, I was having shandies drinking beer when I was 5. And I don't drink a lot, and I'm not a big fan of alcohol or anything, but it was fairly normal in the house where I grew up that you'd have the kid have a little bit as well, and I think that was partly to not stigmatize it, and I think that was correct. When I went to Spain, I realized the same thing. You can have a Happy Meal with beer in Spain, and I think the drinking age is like 12 there or something. So, lots of different approaches to it, and I think Japan certainly does have issues with addiction treatment and recognition in general, and I think that, yes, certainly there are issues with if you are someone who has issues with alcohol abuse, do not come to Japan. It's the worst place in the world, but if you are not someone who has alcohol abuse problems, and actually wants to escape toxic drinking culture in places like New Zealand and the UK, I'd say it's a good place to come to, actually. A lot of debate with the Olympics coming up at the moment as to whether people should both some Korean and Chinese civic groups have requested that the International Olympic Committee ban rising sun flags from events. And apparently it's been triggering people from these groups that so many foreign tourists coming to the Rugby World Cup have been wearing designs with rising sun flags on them. Without wanting to go too much into it, the equation of rising sun flags to the swastika was an ideological symbol associated with the Nazi Party. The rising sun symbol has been a national symbol of Japan, for centuries. And it still is used to this day by the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces. It still is used as a national flag. And during the war, so I get it. People didn't, Japan was shitty during the war and it did a whole lot of fucked up stuff. Well, absolutely, but the idea that Japan should be banned from using its own national flag for that purpose because of the association between it and militarism, I don't know. I'm sympathetic to the idea that people suffered at the hands of Japan, but the idea that Japan should be prohibited from using a national symbol like the rising sun is to me a little bit uncalled for. That said, of course, right-wing groups love to fly those flags, and they do it knowing that they're triggering and offending people in other countries. And when you do it knowing that you're offending people on purpose, that kind of in itself adds, kind of justifies the argument. See, it is for taunting and it is used by racists. They're kind of creating the case which wasn't there to begin with. But Sergeant Booker, exactly. Should we ban their flag too? The fact is, I'm kind of in the same boat as these tourists. It's just an objectively cool design. I don't think it sets a good precedent to associate the idea of national flags with ideology associated with a specific time. That wasn't the fascist flag of Japan. If Japan had a fascist or a racist flag like the Southern Confederate flag, or which was inherently linked with the idea of racial superiority and pro-slavery, if you have or something that was ideologically linked, like a symbol of the beliefs of the Nazi Party. But this is something that predates the Meiji period. It's got from the Shogunate period and all the other invasions. It's like banning the English flag because they invaded France, and they used the flag when they occupied France for 500 years. It's the same sort of argument, and I don't like it personally, but I am certainly sympathetic to the suffering that they have. And the Great Wave painting, of course, as well, is awesome. The new iPhone, I'm not going to get it, but I am very interested in that camera. That's pretty much the most compelling thing about the iPhone nowadays, so I'm going to check that thing out. 8 side jobs for foreigners to make extra money in Japan. Apparently, there'll be a lot of Uber Eats people in Japan. Like the English instructor, obviously, that's a safe fallback for anyone who just wants to survive here anyway while you're thinking about other stuff. Server staff at a restaurant, actually bar staff as well. There's always been traditionally pretty good jobs. Bit of a jump to game localization testers, but certainly I know a lot of people who generally have some technical skill that are involved in game testing and localization by Japanese game development companies. The only thing is that Japanese gaming companies have been a little bit on the decline lately, so I'm not sure how easy that is to do. But yes, if you have Japanese skills, certainly freelance translator. Come think of it, if I ever fell on hard times, it's something I probably stick my hand up to do as well, and it can be pretty good money, pretty brain intensive. But konbini stuff, heaps of foreigners working at konbini, and actually I think it's a great way. You get to actually do a job at a Japanese company, get to meet a lot of people. If you're young, like a student in Japan, I think a konbini job would be great. Uber Eats delivery rider. It seems interesting, and the fact that just Japanese people haven't really discovered that it's a pretty good way to make money. Go-kart tour guide. That's getting a little bit extreme, but the Mari Kart sort of tour, well, I guess that sounds like an ad. J-vlogger. Number 8 is J-vlogger. No, to adapt the quote of Waylon Jennings, mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be J-vloggers. I grew up listening to country music, my dad's musical taste, but yes, I remember that song. I remember my dad drunkenly, emotionally singing, begging me not to be a cowboy after listening to that song. And I may one day do the same with my lad, telling him emotionally and drunkenly, don't grow up to be a J-vlogger. Not that it really matters that much. But yes, anyway, those are 8 jobs. And some of them make sense. And something which makes even more sense. Poop kanji instructor toilet paper. Wow. This is genius. Honestly, if you're studying Japanese, I would import this by the roll. It's actually got kanji learning drills for kids being taught by a poop instructor. This is the most popular child's kanji training series for elementary school kids in Japan. They've made toilet paper out of it, which hell, come think of it, I want to buy this myself. I could use brushing up as well as wiping up. There you go. I think this is actually wonderful. Hell, they should make all toilet paper like flashcards for getting smart at stuff like this. Plus it's poop sensei, so it actually makes sense to use. It's not even offensive. I think that's wonderful. There is a hotel that is, I think this is going to be in Akihabara, but it's going to be a esports dedicated hotel, which is a pretty cool idea with high-spec PCs in every room and high-speed streaming. Okay, it's going to be in Osaka, so there you go. I kind of wonder what the point of having beds is if you're going to be sitting out for esports, but it still seems pretty cool. Hell, I go check that out, so there you go. The big typhoon a couple of weeks ago, and the recovery time it took to apparently, some of the cables were buried underground, same as we had in New Zealand. It was hard for them to find, but a bit scary when you think about the idea of more and more typhoons for a start, but also earthquakes and how long it's taking to recover. The red area is taking 2 weeks to recover. The orange area is taking 1 week, 3 days for the light orange, and recovered areas in green. But pretty scary how long that took to get addressed. Final topic, I think, is the October. So this week, the consumption tax in Japan will move from 8% to 10%. When the consumption tax was introduced at 5% in 1995, the Japanese government lost an election. In fact, I think it was 1993. Lost an election, everybody hated it. Then when the government increased it to 8%, again the LDP lost the election. And it kind of triggered some people blame the 1993 introduction of the 5% consumption tax for the end of the bubble. Certainly it was one of the events associated with it. I don't think it's going to be quite as dramatic this time around, but certainly you are going to see, for me, going to a 100 yen store and everything being 108 yen, that drives me crazy. We have consumption tax in New Zealand. We're one of the countries to sort of pioneer its use. But the government actually made it mandatory for all retailers to include the tax in display prices. Which kind of forced shops to make sure that they weren't putting 100 yen and to suck up the difference, to make it 105 or make it $1 or whatever, adjust the costs. Japanese government doesn't force retailers to do that here, which is why it's a bit annoying when you're dealing with non-inclusive prices. However, if you're dealing with that, at least a 10% tax makes the math a lot easier. And as much as people freak out at 5%, 8%, 10%, it still is pretty low in the scheme of the world. The only thing is that where consumption taxes are brought in other countries, it's often offset by reductions in other taxes because, consumption taxes largely collect themselves. It's pretty hard to collect income tax. It's expensive and inefficient to collect. However, in Japan they are not going to offset any other taxes because the whole reason they're doing this is that the government is not collecting, it's spending far more than it collects as revenue, and plus it's got to deal with all of these extra old people. So yeah, it's exactly like GST. It's essentially consumption tax is like VAT or GST, PERC and Schomburg, it's the same thing. So it's going to be pretty much universal. There are some negotiated sort of exceptions to it, which again I think it should be universal, flat and mandatorily imposed, but yeah. Anyway, that is happening and it's probably going to affect, but it doesn't look like it's going to cause the LDP to lose power this time. Everyone's kind of resigned to it. The Nissan CEO he had to resign because he was found embezzling money, but he's not going to jail, so what can you do? Anyway, that 21% in France, wow. 25% in Sweden, so there you go. That's it, that's the hour. It's been 3 weeks since I've been back. It's good to see all of you guys. Thanks everybody for joining. Poop is indeed Poop is it's been popular since forever, right? It's never going to go out of fashion. So thank you all for joining, keeping me company and letting me talk about the stuff that I find interesting about Japan. I am back. I'll be back every Sunday, 10:40 p.m. Going forward. And hope you're all very well. Have a very good week. Remember, you can follow me on mainly Twitter. Actually, I don't really use Facebook so much lately. So follow me on Twitter at Hiko Simon, same as on YouTube. Talk to me anytime that you like. Let me know if you're coming to Japan and all that good stuff. Have a good week, everybody. And ka kite ano, keep cool till after school. See ya. Boom. Peace. Sean Bro, sorry you had to do that, but thank you for taking care of that. I appreciate it. Peace.